Hello, and welcome again to Dapsy Chess. It's a very cold Thursday afternoon in Washington, D.C. So today I have a game that I want to show us. This is a game that was played in the seventh round of the Prague International Chess Festival. This was the master section, where the big boys are. And this was a game played between Grandmaster Sam Shankland and Grandmaster Lee Quang Lim, both of them residents in the USA. And like I said, this was the seventh round. Now, why am I showing this game? I've always been intrigued by the Sicilian Dragon. And the Sicilian Najdorf, because to me it's the most aggressive kind of Sicilian. There's a whole lot of theory behind it, and there are so many variations. Now, the variations I want to show us today is the variation from the white side, the Sicilian, what do we call this again? The Scheveningen, yes. The Sicilian Scheveningen, where white employed the quiet bishop to e2 line. That bishop e2 is not so quiet, it just looks like it, but let us get right into it. Like I said, this game was played in of the the seventh round of the Chess International Prague tournament. So Sam Schlag was on the black side. The move started with the move e4, c5, knight f3, d6. Now d6 is still transposed to the dragon. For example, after d4, takes, knight f6, a6. Black can decide to go for the dragon with the move g6, but that's not the case in this situation. So after the move knight f6, knight c3, a6 is played here. The Sicilian Najdorf. Like I said, it's a very aggressive defense. And black pretty much is saying, white, you know what? I'm not going to just sit back and try to defend. I'm just going to counter attack right from get-go. So a6 is played, bishop e2. Now, this is the Opochensky variation. It's a very quiet system. Quiet. But things can go so crazy very quickly. So after the move bishop to e2, and white plays e6. Now, this is the Scheveningen variation. This is the Scheveningen response to this bishop e2. Now, e5 is supposed to be the Opochensky pure, National. So there are different ways we can get it. By playing e6, black is trying to be very flexible with his pawn structure, not trying to give away the d5 square or the f5 square immediately, even though there are some variations where those two squares are given away, but black always has a lot of play to show for those deficiency. So in this situation, e6 is played, then we have castles, bishop to e7 is played. Of course, the idea is to castle, keep the king safe. Now, f4, of course, in variations like this, the f4 move is a very important move. You have to make the f4 push. Why the f4 push? Because in situations like this, you might be threatening to play f5, trying to hit at this e6 pawn, or you might decide to play e5 to dislodge the knight away from f6. And once the knight is dislodged away from the f6 square, the king can fall under a lot of pressure on the king on the h7 square. So f4 is played, white black castles. Now we have king h1. King h1 is a prophylactic move. And why do I say that? By moving the king h1, you're avoiding any kind of pain along this diagonal. That's a move you have to play a lot of the times when you're playing the Sicilian opening on the white side. And especially with the king out of any kind of check or pin, white decides always starts to throw all his pieces at the black's king side. Now I have to say this briefly. In the Sicilian defense, well, based on the variation you're playing, white would always almost attack the black king. It's about attacking this black king. So that's why in most Sicilian defenses, if you don't get some kind of logical attack that shakes black's position, if the game goes to the ending, black is normally favored in most Sicilian. Well, in the national, I'm going to say that. So after the move king h1 was played, we have knight to c6. Of course, there's various variations in this. There's always queen to c7. There's knight bd7. Or, all these are possibilities. But here, Shankland plays knight to c6. After the move knight to c6, a4 is played here. I'm not so sure about the move a4. But of course, a4 is a move that normally stops the b5 push. Anytime black gets the b5 push in, he has the bishop to b7, putting pressure on the central squares. Of course, you can't get a b5 push here, not just because the pawn is on a4, but because you're going to be hanging a big knight on the square c6. So a4 is played. Now, you could see the approach of white in this position. White is pretty much playing very positional. Why am I saying this? There are no pieces coming or looking to get to this black king's position. So every move white is playing, a4, this is a restraining move. Bishop to e2, you're not putting the bishop either on d3 to put pressure here, or c4 as in the soldier to put pressure on the f7. Of course, f7 is no longer weak now, thanks to the pawn on e6. So white is playing very positional. This can be a problem. Well, if that's your playing style, that's fine. But when you meet a black player, that really knows what it is like to be on the black side of the Sicilian defense, doesn't matter which variation, you're going to have some problems because they just believe in a lot of active play. So a4 is played here. We have bishop to d7. I pretty much like how black has just developed all these pieces. Now look at this position here. All the pieces are developed. Knight on f6, bishop on e7, bishop on d7, knight on c6. So all black needs to do is to move the queen to either c7 or b6 to make sure the rooks are connected. And after the rooks are connected, you want to place the rook to the files you think is going to give you the most in this position. Normally, when you're on the black side of a Sicilian defense, the best files, your best friends, especially for a rook on a8, is the c file. That's your best friend. Just stick to it. And of course, the off rook is kind of flexible. You could be on e8 or you could be on d8. Doesn't really matter. But the a rook always almost comes to the c8 square. All right, let's keep going. So knight b3. Like I said, you could tell a4 is a positional move. Like, I'm just going to stop you from, being aggressive. Knight b3, another like positional move. Like, I want peace. If you play the white side or the black side of the Sicilian, there cannot be peace. So if you are looking for peace, I don't know, you might have to go to some other openings to find it. Because the way white is playing is just pretty much trying to be like just trying to maintain. In the Sicilian defense, you don't maintain, no, you do something. You have to make something happen. And of course, we could see how this game goes because immediately after that move, Shankland moves e5. Black Shark is pretty much saying, you know what, this is not about maintenance here. I'm trying to get some things going on here. So after the move e5, bishop to e3, white finishes his development. White has his bishop on e2, e3. He has a knight on c3, another knight on b3. White pieces are looking really good. But this is the question I'm going to ask yourself. What exactly are these pieces doing? In a game of chess, your pieces looking good is not enough. From looking good, you have to push them to where they can do good. All right. Remember this. It's not just about look good. You have to do good as well. So white pieces are looking good. Bishop e2, bishop e3. None of them have any flaws, I would say. A rook is looking very good on the f file in case the f file opens up. And the a rook is not really in the game yet, but it's not such a big deal. There's no hurry. Of course, the a8 rook is also not in the game, so nothing to worry about. So bishop e3 is played. Now takes on e5 and takes on f4. Now I think this is the first, this is still theory. But for me, I think this is the first point where black says, you know what, I'm trying to make something happen here. And now by taking on f4, one thing just happened here. Now, white has black has given himself an isolated pawn on d6. What do I mean by an isolated pawn? A pawn that does not have support of the other pawns on each of the sides. There is no supporting pawn on the e file. There is no supporting pawn on the c file. Of course, black doesn't just have an isolated pawn. White also has one on e4 too. We don't have any supporting pawns on the f file or the e file. Now, there's a problem with this for black. Like, of course, black knows exactly what he is doing. The pawn on d6 now becomes a target, right? So it can be easily attacked by putting pressure on this pawn. Now, the pawn on e4 also, but it's not so hard trying to eat on this e pawn. So if you look at the black pieces, the bishop e7 is very, very passive. Hami is another statement, knowing that bishop really has no single move. That's not something you want to have. But black, of course, has a plan based on this capture on f4. So bishop rook takes f4. Oh, interesting. I was expecting bishop to take on f4, but rook takes f4 is played here. After rook takes f4, Bishop goes to e6, beautiful. Now, bishop was already originally on d7 when the game started. What's the bishop doing on d7? Protecting c6, okay, that's fine. Keeping on this diagonal, okay, that's fine. But black decides to say, "Well, you know what, I'm going to move my bishop to e6. What's the point of bishop to e6? You're trying to gain some more grounds. Now, it's not such a bad defending the knight on c6. Now he has an eye on the c4 square. He has an eye on the d5 square. So there's a possibility of pushing the pawn to d5, getting rid of that isolated pawn, which also could be a backward pawn. So I like the bishop to e8, sorry, to e6. And in just improving the positioning of his pieces. The bishop e6 is played. After bishop to e6, we have knight d5. The knight d5. White says, I can't let you push that pawn. And you know, it's not so much about I cannot let you push that pawn. Now think about this. This is a very strong threat. Bishop to b6. What's the point of bishop to b6? After bishop to b6, and if the queen moves, the knight can come to c7, hitting on the e6 bishop, hitting on the rook on a8. So knight to um d5 was played. So it's very important. Black does something about this b6 square. Of course, it does that by moving the pawn to the knight to d7, taking care of that business there. Now, this is one thing about the game chess. Anytime your opponent looks to take control of squares in your territory, you have to either fight back or try to get some kind of counter. I like what black is doing right here. Black is just pretty much taking it safely. And of course, stops the bishop infiltrating the b6 square. Now, knight takes on e7, queen takes on a7. Now, I'm not so sure about that capture. I'm not so sure about that capture. Yes, you're capturing the bishop, but you remember what I said earlier in this position. That bishop was black's worst bishop. Why? Because he didn't really have a lot of squares to move to. And of course, apart from that, he's the only bishop that's actually protecting the pawn on d6. So knight takes e7, queen takes e7. So black, we can say right now, black's pretty much finished his development. What am I talking about? The minor piece already developed. The queen has vacated the last rank. The rooks are connected. So everything is looking good for black. And one thing is black can always put his rooks on d8 or e8. Maybe not necessarily c8, but I still like the square c8, depending on what the position is. And if you look at the nature of this game, this position looks kind of like closed. I won't say totally closed, but there's going to be a lot of maneuverings here. And when we talk about maneuverings, you want to have a knight. So queen takes e7 was played. We have knight to d2. What's the point of knight to d2? Knight c4 is a threat. What's the point of knight c4? Putting pressure on d6. Now, if you take and it takes back, now it's going to have the two bishops. And, you know, when you have the two bishops, you're looking for pawn breaks because the pawn break is going to bring your bishop to life. So knight to d2 is played. Then we have d5. Finally, it's like, wait a minute, I got to get rid of this backward pawn now. It's now or never. So d5 is played. Queen goes to g1. What a weird square for the queen. You know, there's always a possibility of bishop here pinning this guy. There's always a possibility. Of course, that can't happen right now because we have a knight on d7. So what we want to do is try to get our rooks on the best squares. Right now, rook to e8 is played. Now, why rook to e8? Now, if you look on this file right here, if you look on this file, there's a lot of juicy things we can keep an eye on. You know, there are so many much for us on this file, especially when we have the queen and the rook forming a battery. And this bishop is hanging potentially. This bishop is also hanging potentially because I have two against it, and that's the 1 and 2 against the bishop that's only protected here. So rook e8 is a good move. After the move rook to e8, rook goes to f1. A rook goes to f1. You know, it's interesting that in this position, white hasn't created a single strike on the black king. Why am I saying this? Whenever you play openings, you must understand the ideas behind the openings you play. Like I said earlier, white is always looking to attack the black king. Black is always looking to play either on the center squares or the queen side. But right now, we could tell that black is playing in the center squares because of the last move d5 that black played. So after the a rook goes to f1, we have knight to e5. Now, I said something earlier. In a game of chess, it's not just about looking good. Your pieces can look good, but guess what? Those pieces have to do good as well. Knight to e5 is such a strong move. What does the knight to e5 do? Of course, it keeps pressure on the squares in white territory, and of course, defends a very sensitive f7 square. Why is the f7 square a sensitive square? Because that's one of the squares the king is always protecting. And of course, you don't want to have to protect anything at all with your king. So after knight to e5, we have c3. Like I said earlier, it's like black is on and white is on kind of some vacation. I don't know. I don't know if really white wants to. I don't think white was ready to play against the Sicilian defense because all his moves are so kind of like, yeah, you know what I mean. It was just like slow motion pretty much. So c3, what's the point of c3? Okay, you don't want me to move my knight to what's the square? B4. But that wouldn't be a threat because bishop b6 is going to just knock me out. So c3, come on, man, what's going on? So we have knight goes to g6. I really love the way Shankland played this game. Very simple, straightforward. And this is what happens, when you're playing without a plan. I'm not saying white doesn't have a plan. That's not what I'm saying. White is a well-respected GM. What am I in to question what a GM says? I'm just talking based on the position. Because look at the way the pieces have been juggled around. I don't really see anything black and white is trying to achieve. Like I said, the pieces are not just going to look good, those pieces have to do good as well. So knight goes to g6. We have bishop to c5. At least finally it creates a threat. Finally creates a threat. But there's a problem with that move. Now bishop comes to c5. Now if I move my queen, you still have to answer to the threat of the rook on f4. But here's the problem. Now if white could move the queen away, and there's still a threat on the rook on f4, this bishop is going to have some problems. Now, I've always said this in my videos. I like to refer to a lot of videos I've done in the past, and basic stuff. In a game of chess, it's very important for you to know your weak points. When I talk about weak points or weaknesses, these are the pieces, your pawns, or your squares that are undefended. If you have a piece, a pawn, or a square that's in your territory that is not defended, it could get exploited. So if we look at the position right now, we could say there are two pieces in black's camp that are not defended. Well, I'm not going to say two pieces. Well, there are three targets. So the first one is the bishop on e2. It is on its own. Nothing is protecting it. The next is the pawn on b2. Nothing is protecting the pawn. And then we have the pawn on a4. Nothing is protecting the pawn on a4. Why is it such a big deal? Whenever you see a weakness, you want to attack it. But black doesn't have to worry about all this right now because there are no single or any kind of possible threat or attack on those weak squares. So what does white do here? It moves the bishop to e3. Now something has changed. Think about it. Something has changed. What has changed? Now we have four weak points. What are the four weak points? The bishop is weak, the knight is weak, the pawn is weak, and the pawn on a4 is still weak. So what does black do here? Black simply moves his queen away just to any square. Guess what square the queen went to? The g5 square. Why the g5 square? Because now we have an x-ray attack on that weak knight on d2. Now, I wonder how that knight became a weakness. Yeah, there was a bishop on e3. The bishop left what he was doing, which was protecting the knight, and went to harass the queen that had so many squares to go to. We don't play chess like that. Oh, sorry, this is a GM, but hey, it's human also. We make mistakes. So queen goes to g5. After the move queen g5, queen goes to e3. Say, I can't let you take the knight. I'm going to get my queen from the very passive square. I'll move to e3. But guess what? Now you're about to lose a rook. And now everything just changes. Yeah, this is a GM game. Everything just changes here. And this is why I said it's very important to have a plan. And one thing about chess is the things are not enough. Your mode is almost as important. When I say your mode, your focus while playing, your mind has to be in the game. You can't be playing a game of chess and be thinking about something else, especially something that doesn't, appeal to your mind. Something worrisome. We don't want to do that. That's a recipe for disaster. So queen goes to e3. Now black wins an exchange. Knight takes rook. Rook takes back. Of course, you don't want to take with the queen. Why don't you want to take with the queen? You always taught this. Anytime you are down material, you don't want to exchange your pieces. You want to keep them on the board. All right. But if you're up material, of course, you want to exchange the pieces because at some point in time, your extra piece is going to show up and you're going to be able to exploit that extra piece. So rook takes f4 is played here. After the move, rook takes f4, knight goes to e5. The knight improves is the position from c6. What's this knight doing on c6? Even though the knight is looking good, it does looking good. But in the game of chess, you have to always move forward. Knight goes to e5, looking even better. Looking what? Even better. So black has really gained a lot by not really doing much. Thanks to white's just careless plays. Knight goes to e5. After the move knight to e5, we have king to g1. Oh my goodness, what a move. In a chess position like this, White thought to himself, what move can I make here that's really going to make my opponent say, oh my God, it's coming for me. Well, I'm going to move my king to g1. Come on now. What are you threatening? I don't get it. The only thing I see about the move king g1 is the fact that you don't want to get maiden on the background. So you're trying to come close to a loft. This is a loft, and pretty much maybe you're thinking, oh, I don't want to play h3. Well, h3 wouldn't be such a bad idea, especially since black doesn't have a dark squared bishop. So, king g1, come on, you can't do that, GM. King g1, white, black plays knight to g6. You say, white, we need to exchange as many pieces as possible. We need to exchange as many pieces as possible because that way we'll be able to make best use of our extra exchange. So knight to f4 was played. Unfortunately for white, the queen has to go off the board. When you know you've done an exchange or you still have your queen, you can still try to cause trouble with the queen. But black is not having that. He says, you know what, let's get the queen off the board first, and then we can get the other pieces off the board. So queen takes, rook takes on d5, takes with the knight. Bishop goes to d5, more exchanges, more exchanges, more exchanges. So knight goes to e3. Of course, you have no choice. You have to create some play because there's a pin or there's a double attack on your excuse me, or your knight on e4. So knight goes to d6, captures back. The second rook comes into the game. This is pretty much over. But here we still have to check the game and go through the end of the game. So rook goes to d8, attacking knight on d6, bishop defense. Knight goes to f4. Like I said earlier, your pieces looking good is not good enough. They have to do good. So knight goes to g6, from g6 to f4, creating the threat. What is it trying to do? Exchange all the pieces so that this rook will be in the only one on the board with any other piece, of course, and that piece won't have a chance against the rook. There's a reason why the rook is 5 points and the minor pieces are 3 points. So knight f4 is played. We have bishop goes to f1. Still trying to avoid any exchanges. B6. Now you can't take my pawn and protect your bishop at the same time. So you got to back up either here or here. Why? It's important you maintain the protection of your knight on d6. Otherwise, someone's going to have to call 911. So bishop goes all the way to a5. It doesn't want to waste time going to b4 because it knows a5 is coming. So here, black says a5. I'm going to move my pawn to a5. So I'm going to put my pawns on the dark square. I don't want to have to worry about this bishop. This bishop must keep protecting the knight on d6. It doesn't really have a whole lot of squares to go to right now. But let's see how the game continues. Of course, king is a fighting piece. When you get to the end game, it's trying to bring the king to the center of the board. King goes to f2. We have g6. G3 is played. We have knight to e6. Bishop goes to b5, threatening nothing. We have f5. What's the point on f5? Now the king is going to try to look to sneak into the position because it's very important you activate this king. In the end game, the king becomes as strong as any other piece. So you have to get that king work to do. So king goes to e3. We have knight to c5, threatening to win the knight. So you have to do something about that. It goes knight to e6. King f7, the king starts to take a stroll into the game as well. Now, you don't want to say, oh, my king is really, really strong. I'm just going to cause some problem. No, you're not. You're going to get busted with the bishop b6. You're going to lose a piece. So you don't want to do that. So after the move, knight goes to c7, attacking the bishop. I like this next move Shankland made. It made knight to c to e6. The knight really doesn't have a lot of squares to go to. So he has to make a capture here. Captures back. It plays b4. Now, if white can create a pass pawn with these 3 pawns against this 2 and the 2 bishops, he might have some chances. But Shankland was not about to make that happen. G5. What's the point of G5? In every game of chess, it's very important you exploit, take advantage of your advantage. There's a reason why white played B4. You know why? It has the three pawns against the two. What we call this? We call this the majority. So white has the majority on the point side. Now, black just played G5. Why did he play G5? Guess what? He has the three pawns against the two, and we call this the majority on black's point of view. So what's it trying to do? Trying to make the best out of a majority. These are very basic things we should know. So G5 is played. We have takes back. I like this position. That means no pawns move. So this is if you're gonna probe on the pawn, it's gonna have to be the C pawn. But guess what? My knight is waiting for you. So it plays king back, rook checks, king goes back. Now the king is going back. Now think about this. The king is pretty much caught off to this part of the board. So the king doesn't have any land here that he can build anything. So the king is restricted there. Of course, black is going to improve the position of his pieces, try to hit at this target and then just try to round up the game. So it has knight to c5, getting more squares. Now the king can just scroll to the center of the board and just come right there. And while black starts to match his pawns further. So we have bishop goes to c1, attacking the pawn on g5. He plays king g6. Every time a move is made on the chessboard, don't ignore. Please respond. Don't ignore. Please respond. King g6 is played. We have bishop goes to d2. There's an x-ray attack on the pawn. So he's looking to push this pawn to take this pawn off so he has to pass a pawn. Of course, black saw that and he had a plan for it. He plays knight to e4. Bishop goes to e1. Why? He's still threatening to push that pawn. So he plays knight to d6. Just trying to win a pawn right now. He's just trying to win a pawn. Knight to d6. He says, well, I'm going to push this pawn right now. If you take my bishop, I'm going to take this pawn. If I can have two connected pawns here, I might have some chances. I might have some chances. So he says, I'm going to attack the pawn and I want to win a pawn. I want to win a pawn on c4. So what do? He says, I'm going to take the pawn on a5, takes his knight. Now, it's interesting here. You would expect him to take the pawn here. It's possible, but I think this is even better. Now, why is taking on b5 better? Now, if you take with this, I can win this pawn immediately, right? Good. What if you take with the other pawn? What if you take with the other pawn? I'm just going to take that immediately as well, and game is just pretty much over. So it takes with the pawn, it takes the pawn, moves the bishop. Immediately you have to sit by this pawn. That pawn is a dangerous criminal that needs to be kept under lock and key. So you have to keep an eye on this pawn. So black's plan is pretty much easy now. Number one, bring your rook behind the pawn. Number two, take your rook to the seventh rank so the king can approach. Number three, improve the positioning of your king. Number four, try to get a queen and win the game. So let us see how Grandmaster Shankland does this. It says b6. I'm just going to push my pawn anyway because why? I don't want my pawn to get taken. That pawn is the only hope I have to try to save this game. So after the move b6, rook goes to seventh rank. That's what I said. You have to make sure this king doesn't participate. So cut the king off by building a wall. So we have king to e1. What's the point of king to e1? It's very important this king makes a dash at this rook to force this rook off the seventh rank so that the king can try to find himself a way to promote this pawn. But that's a long process away. Of course, king goes to d7. Now, king goes to f7. Another thing I'm going to say in this position is, the king could have gone to the square f6. Now, when you have a bishop, when you're playing against a dark square bishop, never put your king and your rook on the same diagonal, no matter what. Just remember that. And if you're playing against a light square bishop, never put your king and your rook on the same light square of that bishop, no matter what. If you can get away with it, fine. Or just principle wise, so that you don't have to be like, okay, what am I going to do now? There's some things you in chess you don't have to think about. You just do them because they are so inside of you. Now, if you're told like, what's your name? You don't have to say, oh, my name is, no, you know your name already. You're just going to say your name out. So king goes to f7. I like that. Avoiding all the dark squares. It says king to d1, king to e6. Now gets a tempo on the rook. Watch where the rook went to. It didn't come to the dark square. It went to the light square. That's just something you have to know. Rook goes to b5. King goes to d5. Rook check forces the king back. Still the light squares. Forces the king back. Now king goes to dark squares. Now the idea is to move to d4 and then starts to push the pawn. Comes to the light squares. King f5 and king e4. Pawn push. Take. All the way to the light square. Are we getting it now? Right? Yeah. Pawn push. You know, in 2 moves, I'm going to get a queen. He says, no, I don't want you to. He said, I really want to. You know, when he made that move, I really want to get the queen. GM Quang said like, okay, yes, you can. So he gave up and he resigned. A very smooth game. You know, if you look at how this game went, it wasn't as if Shankland did anything extraordinary. I think it was more of White's inability to create problems for Black. You can't make a Najdorf player. Number one, you can't make a Sicilian player comfortable. But to talk of a Najdorf player, you cannot. They will bring fire. They will bring everything. So after the move king to e3, it's impossible to stop the pawn from queening. And of course, after the pawn gets taken and you get let's say you get your king all the way, the rook is going to take the pawn here. I'm going to take this pawn and then this is going to win the game. So I said, let me bring this game. I hope you all enjoyed this game. I really like this very simple game. And, we have to thank these grandmasters for giving us games after games after games after game. To improve in any game you play, you have to learn the openings. You have to study the openings. You have to study the grammar state games from the openings. All right, I'm going to take a break now and see you all soon. Please, I would love to hear back from you. Let me know how you think this game went. If there's any comment, if there's any improvement, let us know. And it is always nice to be here. Take care, God bless, and bye for now. This is Dapsy Chess.